Got myself some wisdom from a leather-backed book. Got myself a savior when I took a second look. Opened up the pages, and what did I find? A black and white portrait of a king who's a friend of mine. Funny how when you think you're right, everybody else must be wrong, till someone with fool's wisdom somehow comes along. His voice was strange and the words he said I didn't quite understand, yet I knew that he was speaking right by the leatherback book in his hand. Hey, hey, what a day, fool's wisdom. Got myself some wisdom from a leather-backed book. Got myself a savior when I took a second look.
Blessings in Jesus, dear friends. My name is James Jacob Prasch from Warrior Ministries, coming to you on RTN, Word for the Weekend. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm in Belfast, Northern Ireland at the moment. Yesterday I was in Dublin, now I'm in Belfast. But RTN is based in Scotland, and we come to you from Scotland to Britain to the world. RTN is Scotland's leading Christian internet TV and internet radio platform. We have a variety of features, as some of you know. The usual social media, Facebook. We have podcasts, Christian radio, some very, very Christ-honoring Christian worship music, and a range of speakers, Bible expositors, and evangelists. We are here for the Lord. We're here to reach the unsaved, and we are here for you. We do thank you so much for joining us. Please tell your friends about RTN. We really want to redeem the time that we have left. We do believe the Lord is coming. We don't speculate about dates, but we do observe the times in which we live, and these are the realities. Be that as it may, let's move on. I had planned this week to speak about the subject, a higher calling, a higher calling. And that's what I wanted to do. But the scriptures tell us, though the plans in a man's mind be many, God's purpose will be established. So I'm going to put a higher calling, which I wanted to do and will like to do, Lord willing, on the back burner. We'll do it hopefully next week. I'm just responding to some communication we have this week. And this communication has been coming to us from various sources, and some of it's been filtered onto me. I haven't seen all of it probably, but I've certainly seen some of it. It's Christians, saved Christians, who've been listening to us on RTN and on other platforms, and they are concerned about what they're seeing in the media, about what's happening in Gaza, in the Israeli response to the invasion of the 7th of October. And the images are there of buildings bombed and rubble and dead children. And Christians are saying we have to love, and most of the victims are children, and we don't agree with Hamas, but look what's happening to these children. This is something we need to have the love of Christ. And they're beginning to consider or even buy into the agenda of the mainstream media and of left-wing politicians, of a ceasefire, and of humanitarian aid, and these kind of things, fueled by these images of these dead civilians, including dead children, being dragged out of rubble in Gaza. Now, those are very powerful images. They're as powerful as the images of what happened on the 7th of October. Only there's a difference. As graphic as those images from the 7th of October are that you've seen, the entirety of the images were shown to the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, yesterday. They saw them yesterday. The Israeli parliament, the government didn't show them publicly, has not shown them publicly, but they showed them to the parliament. And if you've seen the news, there were members of parliament, obviously many of them women, but not all of them, coming out sick and nauseated and crying profusely. Someone holding down a baby and sawing a baby's head off. Someone shoots your wife in front of you and then rapes your daughter in front of you and abducts her. The images that were shown to the Israeli parliament yesterday are much worse than anything being shown to you on BBC or CNN or MSNBC or the mainstream media, much less on Al Jazeera. And I'm not minimizing the suffering of the Palestinian people. I'm simply stating facts. Some people have said Israel's response has been disproportionate. Well, let's talk about how it is disproportionate. It is disproportionate. If Israel's response was to be proportionate, the Israeli military would have to do things that the Israeli military is not allowed to do. They would have to go into Gaza, take little Arab babies out of cribs and prams, and saw their heads off in front of their parents. They would have to rape little girls. They would have to shoot your wife in front of you, kill your children. They'd have to butcher children in front of their parents. If the Israeli response was to be proportionate, that's what they would have to do. In that sense, the Israeli response is indeed disproportionate. But to say that it is overkill or overaction, well, more about that in a few minutes. What I feel propelled to talk about today, and I didn't want to discuss this, we've said enough about it, in my opinion, but people have been contacting us, some people, and if some people contact you about something, you know there's more who are thinking the same thing. That's just the nature of media, the nature of social media, the nature of internet, and so we're doing it. How do we talk about this? Well, what I'd like to talk about in response to these things is, quote unquote, in their own words. In their own words. What they say, what Hamas says, and the supporters of Hamas say, in their own words. I drove up from the Republic of Ireland yesterday, where in the Dáil, Irish politicians were denouncing Israel. The Dáil is the Irish parliament. When I got to Northern Ireland, I drove through a Protestant area and I saw something different. I saw Israeli flags. In the areas controlled by the Provisional IRA and the Republican areas, and by the way, my mother's family was Irish Republican. Because of my mother, I had Irish Republicanism ingrained into me as a child. I don't accept the Provisional IRA. I believe they're gangsters and terrorists. I don't think they're the real IRA of Michael Collins and things like this, but I was brought up in that culture and that psyche and that revisionist view of history that only told half the truth. Now, again, I don't minimize the suffering and injustices perpetrated against the Irish people either. I don't agree with unionism completely either. But that's not our subject now. Our subject now is truth. The scriptures tell us, Hine lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Israel. He who keepeth Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Jesus made it very clear in Matthew 23, the Jews would have to be in Jerusalem regathered for his return and say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. For our Catholic friends here in Ireland, Benedictum qui veni in nomine Dominum, from the Latin Vulgate. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, from the Hebrew, from Psalm 113 to 118, the Hallel Rabbah is where it was from. And that's what Jesus quoted. They must be back in Jerusalem. Jesus also said in Luke 21:24, as most of our regular listeners know, that Jerusalem will be trampled down by the feet of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is completed. Now, it is still trampled under the feet of the Gentiles because of the Temple Mount and the Mosque of Omar and the Mosque of Aqsa. And those prophecies will be fulfilled, but the Jews must again, according to Jesus, be back in Jerusalem. It is the only way you can make any sense of passages such as Zechariah 12 and various others, is to take Jesus' words literally. Jerusalem, of course, is where Satan got his biggest defeat, and it is where he will get his final defeat, and he must try to eliminate the existence of the Jewish state and particularly of the Jewish presence in Jerusalem in his efforts to prevent the return of Christ. He will not succeed, but he's trying to do it. As we always point out, in God's prophetic agenda, the return of Christ will feature God's purposes both for the faithful church, the true church, not the harlot church, but the true church, and God's prophetic agenda for his ancient people, Israel and the Jews, who will face the darkest hour of their history and accept Christ. At least the 1/3 who survive will see him as the Savior Messiah and accept him, according to Zechariah. We have other teachings explaining this in greater depth. God has a prophetic plan for the true church and a prophetic plan for Israel and the Jews. And Satan and the coming Antichrist and false prophet have a set plan to try to destroy both the faithful church and Israel and the Jews. Satan will not succeed. The Antichrist and false prophet will not succeed. But their failure will not be because of a lack of trying. Once the faithful church is removed, as we're told in Daniel and Revelation 12, and in Daniel 12, Satan will turn against the Jews and try to annihilate them completely, as he did the church that has been raptured, rescued, resurrected. Again, we have a variety of teachings delving into these things in greater depth. But let's look. Zechariah says all the nations will come against Israel, all the nations. And we have bemoaned this many times. As we've said, approximately 1.4 billion people that can be sure of, it may be more, but 1.4 billion have watched footage of the Chinese communist massacres in Tiananmen Square. 1.4 million people have seen it. Yet is the official policy of the Chinese government on the Chinese Communist Party and Jinping to deny it ever happened. Everybody knows. You've got 1 million Uyghurs in Western China in concentration camps and slave labor camps. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows they lied about Wuhan. Everybody knows that the COVID virus was China's gift to the world. Everybody knows they lied. Everybody knows what they're doing to the Uyghurs, who are Muslim. Everybody knows they're threatening Taiwan and India and now the Philippines. Everybody knows. Yet this has not stopped Schwab from the World Economic Forum from singing the praises of Jinping and asking him to lead a new world order. This is what goes on in Davos. You couldn't make this up. It's too insane. How, when 1.4 million people watched what happened in Tiananmen Square, can you say it didn't happen and expect people to believe you? And even the ones who don't believe you are more than willing to ignore it, like Schwab. Wow, unbelievable. How many UN resolutions were passed against China? How many? 1? 5? 10? No, 0. How many UN resolutions were passed against Israel in both the Security Council and the General Assembly? And there would be more in the Security Council if the United States did not veto them. Of course, Barack Obama did not veto some of them. Barack Obama was quite happy to lobby for UNESCO, saying that Israel had no historical claim to the land or its holy sites. Obama and Biden are no friends of Israel. They're Israel's enemies. But that's another story. No UN resolutions against China. But 50% plus of UN resolutions are against Israel for wanting to survive. Goebbels said, if you tell a lie often enough, people will believe it. The Jesuits designed the Roman Catholic system of education to stop the spread of the gospel and the Counter-Reformation. And in terms of their philosophy of educational psychology, the Jesuits said, give us a child to the age of 7 and he's out for life. We'll indoctrinate them with catechism to the point they won't be able to believe anything else. No matter what the evidence, they won't believe it. They're too indoctrinated. And you still see that here in Catholic countries like Ireland. Don't confuse me with the facts. My mind is made up. This is indoctrination. But on back of religious indoctrination, there is always demonic deception. Always demonic deception underscores and underlies religious propaganda, false religious propaganda. It doesn't matter if it's Islam, Roman Catholicism, Talmudic Judaism, certainly Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses. It doesn't matter. It's indoctrination. It's mind control. It begins with the indoctrination of children at impressionable ages, and it is demonically motivated. And that has a lot to do with what we see today. It certainly had a lot to do with the trouble that existed in Northern Ireland through most of my lifetime. Before the Good Friday Agreement, and it's still not completely over. But it's much worse in the Middle East. In their own words, saved Christians are seeing these images of the rubble and of the corpses of children and of hospitals closed down. And they're saying, where's the love of Jesus? As Christians, how can we support this? We know Hamas may be wrong, and they are wrong, and what? But look at this happening. What they're saying. They haven't, of course, seen the images of what Hamas did to the Israelis on the 7th of October. They haven't seen that. Well, let's begin at the beginning. It's a good place to begin. People are talking about things now, and some Christians are even buying into it. Some of the things they're saying are a ceasefire, humanitarian aid, and a ceasefire. This is to say nothing of the mainstream propaganda of occupation, blockade, civilians being targeted, humanitarian assistance. The Jews are facing something. It is the curse of the law. Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28. No one ever thought 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, that what happened in Germany in the 1930s at the advent of the Holocaust would happen again. But now it is global. In New York City, my native city, the biggest Jewish population center in human history, 7,000 pro-Hamas protesters closed down the Brooklyn Bridge. Last Friday of last week at rush hour, thousands and thousands of pro-Hamas protesters went into Grand Central Station in Manhattan, the biggest railroad station in the world. I used to work there, and closed it down. In campuses, including Ivy League campuses across America and in other countries, pro-Hamas, anti-Israel demonstrations, attacks on Jewish students. Jewish students are afraid to go to school. The stupidity of left-wing American Jews and British Jews who voted Democrat. They're in the party with apologists for Islamic terror, apologists for Hamas, the Squad, Alexandra Ortega-Cortez, with Tlaib, with Omert, with Presley, with Lori Bush, liberal American Jews in the same party with not only haters of Israel, but virtually anti-Semites, and in the vote to censor Tlaib, who's a Palestinian Arab Muslim, anti-American, dances with the Palestinian flag, pro-Hamas. 23 Republicans voted with the Democrats not to censure her, including Darrell Issa. She should have been censored. But 23 Rhino Republicans voted with the Democrats to let her continue her pro-terror, anti-Semitic vitriol on the floor of the Congress. This is Jew hatred. How do you explain this? How do we explain it? The riots in Paris, the riots in London, taking over Liverpool Street Station in London. All over the place, all over the world, Jews are seeing what's happening. Bolivia, South America, Argentina. In Sydney, Australia, riots in Sydney. Gas the Jews, gas the Jews. It's like the Holocaust. It's happening again, just like the 30s. And again, the stupidity of American Jews who vote Democrat and who are politically liberal. Their stupidity is now catching up with them, as we always warned it would. We always said that Jews who vote Democrat, and I'm not trying to be political, I'm just making a statement. A Jew who would be a political liberal and vote Democrat, vote for the party of Biden and Obama, who've done so much to help Iran. When a Jew votes Democrat, they may as well sew a yellow star on their jacket and pay their own train fare to Auschwitz. We've said that repeatedly. That's what they're doing. And now they're waking up to it. Even Greenblatt, a left-wing American Jew from the Anti-Defamation League, is realizing the stupidity that he himself subscribed to and propagated. But Israel does have people who stand with it. When I drove across the border from the Republic of Ireland to Northern Ireland yesterday, things changed. And The sat nav diverted me because of roadworks to get to where I am speaking to you from at the moment. And I drove through some Protestant neighborhoods. And in Northern Ireland, you still have a conservative evangelical Protestantism. There's still more believers in Northern Ireland than there are anywhere else in the UK, except for the Hebrides in Scotland. The Hebrides in Scotland, and to a residual degree, Northern Ireland, are still outposts of evangelical Christianity. What's left of it? It's not what it was. But with the exception of the Hebrides, where the revival was with Duncan Campbell in the late 40s, we still have a lot of Christians. Northern Ireland still has more Christians than post-Christian, neo-pagan England, Wales, and the rest of Scotland. So here we are. And I get across the border and I begin to see Israeli flags, people standing with Israel. And I even met some people in the Republic of Ireland who are pro-Israel, who don't believe what the media, the RTE, is saying, or what is being said in the Irish Parliament or the British Parliament or on the BBC. There are some people who can think for themselves, but most do not. And I'm sorry to say, there are some Christians buying into this love, ceasefire, peace, humanitarian aid, things that sound very much in line with the teachings of the New Testament. And we even had some religiously emotional Christian contact us talking about Jesus wants us to love. Somehow love and self-defense are mutually exclusive in his thinking. Jesus twice engaged in violence, didn't he? Twice. He engaged in physical violence against religious hypocrites. Not once, but twice. Neither Peter with Cornelius or John the Baptist told soldiers to stop being soldiers. The reason early Christians were pacifists is serving in the Roman army mandated participating in pagan sacrifices to pagan gods before the battles, and Christians wouldn't do that. That is why they wouldn't serve in the army. But they were not ideological pacifists because of their faith. Jewish Christians supported the second rebellion against Rome until Bar Kokhba was proclaimed to be the Messiah by Rabbi Akiva. And because they wouldn't follow a false Messiah, they were excommunicated from the synagogues by Rabbi Akiva. But at first, they were going to fight like any other Jew. Well, there are believers now in Israel, many of them. As we've said, most Jewish believers serve in combat brigades called Kravi. They volunteer. My son had been one of them when he was younger. My son was a lawyer, could have went into the military as a lawyer at some point. Well, they did transfer him to the legal corps because he spoke English and he had a law degree, and they needed people who could speak to the Western media in legal terms with fluent English. So they took him out of a tank. This was the last time the attack from Gaza came. But I can tell you what it's like seeing this. And I'm not exaggerating it. I was speaking at a big conference in California. I had to speak to thousands of people. And in the green room, thousands. And the position my son was in was being Katusha, heavily rocketed by Hezbollah from Lebanon, and my son was there. And I had to go out and speak, not knowing if my kid was all right. I recall finally being able to get a phone call through, and he was with his grandparents, and I hear the sirens going off in the background, and his Holocaust survivor grandparents, most of the family had been killed by the Nazis, old people with breathing masks in case of nerve gas or biological attack in a shelter. And of course, my sister's husband was murdered by the Muslims on September 11th in the World Trade Center. I've experienced these things personally. A store where my wife used to take our children when they were babies, the toy shop. I remember Islamic terrorists threw hand grenades into the toy shop. Thankfully, my children and wife were not in there at the time. They targeted children. Targeted children. The media doesn't talk about that too much. But Christians see these images and they begin talking about love and peace, and we have to be Christian, and the victims are children, and how can we do this as Christians and support this and things. And they're taken in by this. Well, I'd like to go, first of all, and do something called In Their Own Words. In their own words. 19 hours ago, in Lebanon, the real leaders of Hamas aren't in Gaza. They're in Qatar, they're in Lebanon, they're in Iran, but they're not in Gaza. They're never in harm's way. Their people are. The ones who pull the strings and push the buttons are in safe zones far away from Gaza. Ghazi Hamad, one of the two main leaders of Hamas. The two main leaders at the present time are Ghazi Hamad and Mahmoud al-Zahara. They're the two main ones. There are others. We will quote them. But 19 hours ago, Ghazi Hamad, speaking in Lebanon, he said, October 7th, when the babies were beheaded, the women raped and abducted, children shot in their beds, the 1,400 Jews murdered. That is only the first invasion. We're going to do it again, he says. We're going to do it again. Can you make peace with somebody who says we're going to do it again? Now they're asking for a ceasefire so they can reorganize. We'll come back to that. We're going to do it again. Oh, there should be a ceasefire. We're going to do this again. In the meantime, we want a ceasefire because you're winning. But we're going to do this again. This is what they openly tell their own people. 19 hours ago, we're going to do it again. Would you make peace with somebody who beheaded babies and said, we're going to do it again? Or would you wipe them out? Last week, Mahmoud al-Zahar made the following statement from Qatar. He said, this is not only about Palestine and destroying the Zionists. We are going to take over all 510 million square kilometers of the earth, as our Prophet Muhammad said. And there will be no more Jews and there will be no more Christians. It is the frequent battle cry in Arabic of Hamas. First the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. First we're going to murder the Jews, then we're going to murder the Christians. They say that this is not about Palestine only or Gaza only or Israel only. We want to take over the world and establish an Islamic caliphate with jihad in which there will be no more Christians. I saw the media lie similarly about the conflict in Serbia. There were no good people in what happened in Bosnia-Herzegovina and Serbia. None. But the Kosovo Liberation Army was Muslim and aligned to Al-Qaeda. And Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, Javier Solano from the European Union, and Wesley Clark, NATO, intervened attacking the Serbs. The Serbs saw themselves as defending Western civilization in Europe from militant Islamic invasion. They saw themselves in the character of King Jan Sobieski of Poland, saving Europe from the Muslim invasions that had reached as far as Vienna. It's an ongoing conflict. But of course, the Clinton White House, Tony Blair as the British Prime Minister, Wesley Clark and the European Union only condemned the Serbians. Milosevic and these. Now, I'm not defending everything the Serbians did by any means, or that the Bosnians did, or that the Croats did. There were no good guys, but they only emphasize what they want you to hear. They don't tell you the whole truth. The Kosovo Liberation Army was aligned with Al-Qaeda, who would later attack America September 11th. This is how corrupt the American and British governments can be, and how corrupt the media is when it lies. Well, it's the same thing now. Israel is not just defending Israel, it's defending Western civilization. It's defending the Judeo-Christian world. Last week, Hamas, its leader Mahmoud al-Zahar, said there'll be no more Jews and there will be no more Christians. After Gaza, after Palestine, after Israel, we move on. And of course, they're saying this because of the religious ideology to which they subscribed in harmony and in tandem, working in tandem with Iran. Iran in recent weeks has increased capital executions by 30%. The stupidity of these left-wing students in universities, the stupidity, as I've said, is unbelievable. Those same morons would claim to be pro-homosexual rights, pro-same-sex marriage, pride flags, all this stuff. Oblivious to what happens to homosexuals and lesbians under Sharia and what Hamas does to them, and what Iran, the sponsors of Hamas, does to them. Their hatred of the Jews is so consuming that they're willing to sing the praises of those who also hate them. Now, this happened in the days of Obadiah. Read Obadiah 15. This happened. They hated the Jews so much that they sang the praises of the Babylonians, even though the Babylonians were going to do the same to them. It's a demonic mentality. Well, let's go on their own words. The two main leaders of Hamas, Mahmoud al-Zahar and Ghazi Hamad, we're going to do this not just to the Jews, we're going to get rid of the Christians. It's not just going to be in Gaza or Israel. It's going to be all 510 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface. This is our real cause, to kill the Christians after we kill the Jews. You see MSNBC or BBC or RTE? Or BBC, they don't talk about this. They don't talk about what Israel's really dealing with. Or Ghazi Hamad, we're going to do this again. Give us a ceasefire so we can do it again. In their own words. Let's go back and look at their own words. Remember, under the Israelis, when Israel was forced to conquer the Gaza Strip in self-defense in 1967, the standard of living of the Gazan Arabs, at that time not called Palestinians, they were Egyptian-controlled, went up 370%. You've heard me say this. And everything from unemployment, infant mortality, longevity, the standard of living of the Arabs in Gaza under Israeli control went up 370%. When the Israelis left in 2005, it was in the hands of Fatah, Yasser Arafat's organization, who now control the Palestinian Authority on the West Bank. The international aid that came from the United States, from European countries, from Britain, and from oil-rich Arab countries, so much of the money was embezzled by Arafat's cohorts. The people were getting almost nothing of the aid given to build an infrastructure and create the genesis of a Palestinian state in Gaza, so-called. That the people turned against Fatah, against Arafat, and went to Hamas, who was backed by Iran. Hamas took over. Fatah didn't like it, and there was a war between Fatah and Hamas. Over 8,000 Gazan Arabs were killed by each other in 2006 and 2007. In their own civil war, over 8,000. Hamas finally won. There was no talk of ceasefire. Jihad of Muslims killing other Muslims. Most jihads are Muslims killing each other. They have to hate the West and attack Christians and Jews, because if they don't, they're going to attack each other. That's what's in Scripture. Esau's sword will be against his brother, Ishmael's seed will always be divided. Unless they turn to Christ, Muslims will always kill each other. Arabs will always kill each other, always. They need a common enemy or they'll kill each other. It's their only basis of unity. And they know they have to kill Jews and Christians, otherwise they'll kill each other, as they've done repeatedly. They did it in Lebanon. They did it in the pogroms in Kuwait. Saddam Hussein did it to his own people. It happened in Black September in Jordan, where King Hussein of Jordan's British-trained Jordanian Legion massacred between 15 and 18,000 Palestinian Arabs in 12 days in 1970. What they do to each other is far worse than anything you see with Israel. But nobody says anything about it. It's only when the Israelis, when the Jews dare defend themselves from people who want to exterminate them, that the world is up in arms. So Hamas comes to power. As soon as they get power, within 48 hours, they began cracking down on the Christian community, the Arab Christians in Gaza. Within 48 hours. They won the Baptist completely, took over Baptist hospitals and things like this, and subordinated them to Hamas rule, and they warned not to evangelize. Not that I'm a Roman Catholic, but 7 Roman Catholic churches were burned in Gaza to the ground. 7. They cracked down on Christians within 48 hours, but immediately when they got power, Ismail Haniyeh, one of the main leaders of Hamas in Gaza, said, "We shall never abandon our arms. We will not lay down our arms as is being demanded and negotiate. We will never change our principles. We don't want a 2-state solution. We want a 1-state solution. An Islamic jihad regime with Sharia from the river to the sea, from the Jordan to the Mediterranean, and we're never going to change our principles. We're never going to make peace. We're never going to abandon violence," said Ismail Haniyeh, chief leader of Gaza in the Gaza Strip. With the September 11th attacks, they began saying incredible things about the United States. However, Mahmoud Zahar said, Israel has no right to exist. It is the land of the Waqf. the land is Palestine, and that the Taliban are 1,000 times more righteous than the Americans after the September 11th attacks on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, and wish I lost a relative. The Taliban, who perpetrated the September 11th attacks, are 1,000 times more righteous than the Americans, said Mahmoud Zahar, who is still the leader of Hamas. And you see students and people in America supporting Hamas. It's the land of the what? In other words, if you understand Islam, you know, and I've said this on other recordings, Islam divides the whole world into two camps, Dar el-Islam and Dar el-Harb, the world of Islam and the world of the sword. They make war against the infidel to force them to be Muslims. And they believe that if they conquer any land, Allah has given it to them, and it's theirs by right of divine mandate. What they are saying is, you must accept our religion, our belief, that if we conquer something, God, our God, Allah has given it to us, and we have a right to it. And you must accept that. Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, whoever, must accept Islam. That's what they're saying. And of course, we've seen Western politicians, Biden, Obama, the Bush family, bowing the knee to them. But that is their mentality. That is their mentality. Allah gave us this land. Now, this is 2005 when the Israelis pulled out under Sharon, Ariel Sharon. Mushir al-Masri said, when that happened in 2005, Allah has given us victory over the Israelis and over Sharon. And that Araim Araishi, the first female suicide bomber who killed 4 people, was a great heroine. Killed 4 Israelis, innocent people, and herself. This was encouraged by Mashir al-Masri. They believe that if you give them land for peace, they've prevailed in the jihad, that Allah, their God, has given them victory, and it was achieved by suicide bombing. That's how they see it. They don't see it as land for peace. They see it as victory in the jihad that was achieved by suicide bombing. Well, let's continue. This is very different than the Western philosophy of war. The Western philosophy of war, and in fact, if you read Sun Tzu, even the Eastern philosophy of war says something different. Basically, it was encapsulated by the American General Patton. He said, nobody ever won a war by dying for their country. You win the war by, quote unquote, making the other SOB die for his. Islam is different. You win the war by dying because of the doctrine of Shahadi in Islam. Christianity says the assurance of salvation comes from a saving faith in Christ. Islam says the only assurance of salvation is to be a Shahadi, to die in a jihad. So they love death more than they love life. And they're willing to kill themselves to get their 72 virgins. And they indoctrinate children with this. Of course, the leaders don't do it themselves. They believe they got the victory when Israel gave land for peace, but there was no peace treaty. The Bush administration just wanted them to do it to please the Saudi Arabians. Their own words. A little earlier in 2003, the 10th of June, Hamas leader Abdulaziz, we will not have one Jew left alive. Quoting from the Islamic scriptures, the last day will not come until a tree says to a Muslim, there's a Jew hiding on back of me, come and kill him. That's their religion. And you're supposed to make peace? You're supposed to have a ceasefire? Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, who was killed by the Israelis. You see, they don't kill themselves in the suicide attacks. If the leaders get killed, it's because the Israelis kill them. Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, he was an evil, evil old demon-possessed man. He said Iraq will have victory over the West and over the Americans if the people turn themselves into human bombs. They brainwash children into turning themselves into human bombs. I recall watching a news clip with a very, very dishonest reporter, a journalist who was actually a propagandist pretending to be a journalist, named Orla Gorling. She was Irish, reporting for the BBC, and I watched the clip. They got a learning impaired young Arab youth, maybe 12 or 13, and he was learning impaired. They strapped bomb onto him and told him how to go and pull the cord, and he would get 72 virgins. I watched this clip. They had an Israeli soldiers when they stopped him, trying to save his life. They had Arabic-speaking Israeli soldiers who were talking to the Israeli ordnance disposal team. So you had soldiers who knew how to disarm a bomb speaking Hebrew to these Israeli soldiers who spoke Arabic, who were talking to the kid, trying to tell him, cut this carefully, now do this and remove this. They're trying to save the kid from blowing himself up. He was obviously, if not retarded, a person who learning impaired. And I'm hearing what they're saying in Hebrew. My Arabic's all right, but it's not that good. I can't understand everything. Not nearly. I can just get around, but I speak Hebrew. And I was hearing what they were saying. The soldiers were telling, the ordnance disposal expert soldiers were telling the Arabic-speaking soldiers who were talking to the kid. They were trying to save the kid's life. The Israelis were on back of shield barriers and telling the kid, now be careful and do this and don't do that. They were trying to save the boy's life. They found out that he had packing and masking tape around his genitals because he was promised 72 virgins. Now, you get a kid in early adolescence who's going to get 72 virgins. He's low intelligence. He'll pull the cord. Get his 72 virgins. And they taped up his genitals to convince him that he'd have the apparatus to enjoy the rewards of Allah after he does it. Or a Gorling, that stinking hypocrite, that dishonest, terrible excuse for a journalist, said, we wanted to interview the boy to tell us his side of the story, but the Israelis wouldn't allow it. In my reckoning, an apologist for Islamic terror is just as guilty as an Islamic terrorist. That includes Tliab. You know, during the Lincoln administration, the American Civil War, there were members of Congress who would not support the cause of preserving the Union and ending slavery. And they were censored and removed from Congress for disloyalty to the United States because they wouldn't support Lincoln's opposition to secession and slavery. This was the original Republican Party founded by Lincoln. He's the founder, the main founder of it. Now you've got 13 members of the Republican Party who will not censure or remove an apologist for Islamic terror and an anti-Semite. That's one of the reasons I'm not a Republican. I'm just an independent. Although there are good people in the Republican Party, the party itself is no good. I've been urging people to pray for Mike Johnson. He is a good man. The new secretary, the new Speaker of the House. But let's continue. I saw this. He's going to get his 72 virgins by pulling the cord. Sheikh Ahmad Yassin said, turn yourself into human bombs. How do you make people like that who indoctrinate children to take a kid in early adolescence when he becomes sexually aware, tell him he's going to get 72 virgins, promise the vitality to ingratiate his lust, tape up his genitals to encourage him, and have him pull a cord? Then the Israelis saved the kid's life. They saved his life. And whoever else he was going to murder, innocent people. And Ora Gawley in the BBC says the Israelis wouldn't let us talk to the kid. They blocked us from hearing his side of the story. Oh, God. This is the reality. BBC, bias, blasphemy, and cowardice. They did their Jerry Springer opera with a homosexual Jesus. I would like to see them do that with Mohammed. They won't. They're cowards. They're blasphemous, bias, blasphemy, and cowardice. BBC. But let's go on. Christians watch the BBC News and they allow themselves to be soft-soaped and manipulated by that? Will not leave one Jew, says Aziz. 10th of June, 2003. Sheikh Amin Yassin turn into human bombs. The Taliban who blew up the World Trade Center, they're righteous. Jews have no right to exist. Israelis have no right to be in that land, even though they're the indigenous people. We'll never give up our principles. We don't want peace. You see, when they talk to each other, they don't use the term salim, peace. What they mean is hudna, a temporary ceasefire so we can reorganize. When you see these appeals for a ceasefire coming from the Muslim world, that means it's based on Muhammad's flight from Mecca to Medina. That means a temporary ceasefire in order to reorganize and reattack. But they propagate it in the name of peace because there are enough stupid people and enough corrupt journalists and corrupt politicians and corrupt academics in the West to believe it's a cause for peace. Oh, just have a ceasefire. We have to have peace. No, to them it means we're losing. We want to stop the fight so we can reorganize and rearm and continue the fight. Hudna. But the media doesn't tell you that either. This is their own words. March 9th, 1989. This is something that was published in the United States by the Islamic Association for Palestine, speaking to Muslims living in the United States. It came from Hamas. A call to jihad, come to martyrdom. Hamas was telling Muslims who live in the United States, particularly students, to become martyrs, suicide murderers like the September 11th crowd were. Telling Americans, supposedly Americans, these are Muslims in the United States. Now, the Bush dynasty, who the Saudi Arabians carried in their back pocket after September 11th, continued the express visa program for Saudi Arabians, even though most of the September 11th attackers were Saudi Arabians, and it was funded by members of the House of Saud from the Saudi government. But Bush suppressed this. The Bush administration was in the pocket of the Saudi Arabians, the Bush dynasty. That's what they did. You've got these open border policies. God knows how many radical terrorists are coming into the United States. They're giving visas to radical Muslim students in Britain and America. And Hamas told them, join the jihad in America, become a martyr, Shahadi, die for Islam, do suicide attacks in the United States. We've already seen it. Barack Obama did not want to violate the civil rights of radical Muslims in the United States. It was on the internet what these people were, but the San Bernardino bombers came to Redlands, California, and made the bombs. It was shown on the internet that they were radical. But the Obama administration prevented a proper investigation from taking place and gave these people visas, and they came and killed 14 Americans in San Bernardino, courtesy of Barack Obama's administration and of Obama personally. Obama is a friend of Islamic terror. No matter what he says, he has aided and abetted them repeatedly. And so is Biden. But that's political. Let's look. They're openly telling Muslims in the United States to fight a jihad against the United States and to become martyrs, to die for Islam as they see it as martyrdom. Their own words. And they go on to say, a Jew is a Jew, not a Zionist. In the Hamas charter, it's not about killing the Zionists. It's about killing the Jew. They don't make a distinction. Some stupid left-wing people believe the garbage. We're not against Jews. We're only against Zionists. Hamas does not make that distinction in its charter. In their own words, they don't make the distinction. September 8th, 1988, Hamas. Strike the Jews wherever possible. California, Texas, New York, Canada, the United States, Great Britain, Holland, wherever possible, kill the Jews. Not Zionists, Jews. And then, of course, they say they want to kill the Christians. This is their own words. The 2nd of May, 2011. Again, Hamas leader Ismail Hanya. We condemn the killing of the holy Arab warrior Bin Laden, who is a martyr for Islam. The Obama administration kept Robert Gates. They kept Bush's Secretary of Defense as Secretary of Defense to get Bin Laden. It was not the Democrats who did it. They kept Republicans who they ran against and opposed. But once they won the election, they knew that they are the only ones who knew how to get bin Laden. When the Navy SEALs finally got bin Laden, Ismail Hanya said, Hamas condemns the killing of this holy Arab martyr. The villain responsible, the murderer responsible for September 11th, is a holy Arab martyr, according to Hamas, and the Americans had no right to kill him. In their own words. He had no right to kill bin Laden. He's a holy Arab Muslim martyr. April 18th, 2011. Atala Abu al-Sub. Jews are the most despicable of animals who must be made to crawl. Not Zionists, Jews. Despicable animals. There are writings in the Quranic and the Islamic scriptures calling Jews monkeys and apes. Isn't that hate literature? Why is that literature not banned? Oh, you're an Islamophobe. Jews are the most despicable animals that must be made to crawl. They're monkeys and pigs. According to Hamas, Atala Abu al-Sub on the 8th of April, 2011. Khalil al-Hanya, the 11th of November, 2010. The Holocaust is a Zionist lie. Forget the Nuremberg trials. Forget the films of Dachau and Auschwitz and Buchenwald. Forget Eichmann. Forget Himmler. Forget Goebbels. And remember, the Holocaust, 6 million Jews, but it was also gypsies, political dissidents, handicapped people, because they were obstacles to the Aryans being a master race. The Holocaust is a Zionist lie. It never happened. It's a lie invented by the Zionist Jews, says Hamas. It never happened. Khalil, November 11th, 2010. Khalid Mashal, on the 27th of December, 2 days after Christmas in 2008. Resistance through suicide missions. And Ayman Taha said, this suicide attacks are our rights. We have the right to commit suicide attacks. It is our mission. Hamas said that's their mission, to have suicide bombings. 27th of December. 23rd of April, 2007. Yosef al-Sharafi. The Jewish faith is based on blood and murder. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. The Islamic faith, according to Hamas, is based on blood and murder. The Israelis do everything they can to avoid civilian casualties, to avoid collateral damage, to avoid killing civilians, while Hamas, in the name of their religion, targets it. Yet on the 23rd of April 2007, Hamas spokesman Yosef Al-Sharaf said the Jew has a faith based on religion and murder. This goes on and on. We're never going to change. We'll kill you wherever possible. How can you make peace with such people? No. They're calling for a ceasefire on humanitarian grounds. After the first discoveries were made of the Nazi death camps, after the Battle of the Bulge, when Goebbels unleashed his total war, once Goebbels unleashed his total war, certain things happened. One, the Nazis unleashed the V2 attacks against London, rockets launched from Holland against London. Not against any military target, just against London. The British called them doodlebugs. They thought the Blitz was largely over, but now the Germans had rockets. Well, now Hamas has rockets. Between a quarter and a third of them misfire, but they have rockets and they shoot them indiscriminately at Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, the same as the Nazis shot them indiscriminately at London in their total war. Then, at the Battle of the Bulge, their last attempt to push the Allies back on the Western Front, it was the policy of the Nazis to shoot prisoners of war who were unarmed. They shot unarmed American prisoners of war. Word went out among the 101st Airborne at Bastogne in Belgium, take no prisoners. If they're going to shoot prisoners of war in violation of the Geneva Convention, that was their total war. You capture Americans, you shoot them dead. Well, I was to the site of a field hospital in Bastogne, one of the main ones. Wounded soldiers, a combination of American and Belgian medical personnel, Belgian civilian nurses, American military medical corpsmen, physicians, and nurses. At the field hospital in Bastogne, Belgium, I have been there, where it was. The Nazis deliberately shelled the hospital, targeting the wounded, killing Belgian nurses, killing wounded American soldiers, and the physicians trying to save their lives in the total war. So they began to see what was going on in the concentration camps. In the total war, they worked the ovens 24/7. They knew they were losing, so they wanted to kill as many Jews as possible before the war was over, including children. They were just kicking people alive into the gas chambers. I'd been to Dachau and seen what happened in Dachau, and that was not even a major Jewish camp, but it was not only Jews who they murdered. Even when they knew they were going to lose, they killed Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Christian author, who wrote the classic book, The Cost of Discipleship. They murdered believers. Their total war, they revved up the extermination camps, shot unarmed prisoners of war, shelled hospitals, targeted them, and indiscriminately fired rockets at London, the way Hamas does against Tel Aviv and Ashdod and Ashkelon. Okay. What was the Allied response? What did the Americans and British do? The Royal Navy shelled Hamburg, Germany at close range. And the RAF with Bomber Harris was his nickname, and the American Army Air Corps destroyed Dresden. They bombed Dresden to nothing. The bombing in Dresden was worse than Hiroshima and Nagasaki, even though it was non-nuclear. They created firestorms and sucked the oxygen out of the atmosphere. The Germans knew they were in trouble. One of Hitler's deputies from the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, was Jodl, an admiral named Jodl. And somehow he had a flag of truce or came for a powwow of some kind to the British. And he comes to Montgomery, Field Marshal Montgomery, and he says to Montgomery, "You're killing women and children." And Montgomery said there was a city in England called Coventry before you destroyed it. The men were all gone to war. There was only women and children left. And the Luftwaffe destroyed it and killed the women and children. We're not killing women and children. We're killing Germans. And we're going to keep on killing Germans until the Third Reich collapses and Germany surrenders. And the leaders of the Reich are brought to justice, which they later were at Nuremberg. We're not killing civilians or women. We're killing Germans. That is how the British and Americans responded. They said, "You kill women and children. We don't want to do this. You can end this right now. Surrender. Surrender and it will be over. We're not going to kill all the German people the way you slaughtered the Jews and the gypsies. We only want the leaders of the Nazi Party." No. Hitler remained in his bunker and continued to fight. The Americans and British had already bombed Berlin to smithereens. The Soviets, who lost 20 million people, crossed the Oder River and entered into Eastern Germany, and surrounded Berlin. Hitler was fighting in his bunker, the Führer bunker, right down to the very end. The Russians were within a quarter of a mile of the bunker when he committed suicide. Well, he hid underground. That's what Hamas does. It hides underground. Hitler didn't care about his own people. He made it clear. He subscribed to a philosophy of the Übermensch, the Superman. And if the German people didn't win the war, it's because they failed to be the Übermensch, the triumph. He said he didn't feel sorry for the German people. Well, the leaders of Hamas don't feel sorry for the people of Gaza. Goes on. The Übermensch. Nobody said to the Russians, "We have to have a ceasefire. You're killing civilians. We have to let humanitarian aid go into Berlin." No. The Soviets said, no. The British and Americans said, "Okay, we'll do it. Surrender. We will get food, water, medical supplies into Germany to the German people. No more German civilians will die. You can end this right now." Nazis said no. Jodl said no. It's against our principles. Yeah. Why are there two different rules One for America, one for Russia, one for Britain, but another one for Israel and the Jews. You're killing civilians. Let's see what's really, really happening. The Israelis said, we're creating a safe zone in southeast Gaza. Go down there. We will not bomb it. It's close to Rafah, the Egyptian crossing. Go there. You'll be safe. Hamas stopped allowing people to flee the target zone. They attacked Israeli civilians, including women and children, and deliberately used their own as human shields. They themselves hiding in the tunnel network. They took the international aid given to help the people and used it to build an underground military infrastructure with weapons stored in it and ordnance. The portals of entry and exit from those tunnels are normally under schools, under hospitals, and under mosques. So they can come out from under the schools, under the hospitals, and under the mosques and fire rockets at Israel and then disappear again. The Israelis say, get out of there. Please, people, get out of there. Go to the safe zone we created. Head south. And they dropped leaflets in Arabic telling them to get out. We don't want to kill civilians. Even though many of those civilians, if the census is to be believed, the poll taken in September, less than a month before the invasion of October 7th, it was claimed by Hamas, or it was claimed by the Arab media, that 67% of the people in Gaza supported Hamas. I don't know if they're telling the truth. I know there are people in Gaza who don't support Hamas, but I know there's a lot who do. Nonetheless, the Israelis said, get out of there. We don't want to kill civilians. Hamas wouldn't let them leave. So we target Israeli civilians, children, women, the infirm, the aged, and then we use our own civilians, children, infirm, aged, women, etc., as human shields. So that when we shoot at you and you shoot back in self-defense, we are the victims. Again, the BBC and CNN are more than happy, to say nothing of Al Jazeera, to portray that lie. How can you have a ceasefire? There was a ceasefire in 2006-7. There was a ceasefire in 2011, a ceasefire, I believe, in 2016, and I believe 2011. That's at least 3, possibly 4 times the Israelis responded to Hamas attacks with rockets and then agreed to a ceasefire. But to the Muslims, it is a Hudna. It's not peace. It's an opportunity to regroup and rearm and continue the jihad. When they say they want a ceasefire, it's not about saving human life. It's about saving Hamas. They don't care about human life. They use them as shields. They believe they're doing him a favor because they'll be Shahadi. They'll die in a jihad and go to heaven and get 72 virgins or whatever they're going to get. We need a ceasefire for humanitarian reasons. What a lie. The definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over and over and expect a different result. It has often been said. They did that 3-4 times. And it just creates what Islamic religion, let alone military strategy, what their religion teaches is Hudna, the opportunity to regroup and reorganize when you can't win so you can attack again. And they say we're going to attack again. They openly admit it. Oh, but the BBC says we have to have a ceasefire for humanitarian reasons. We have to have a ceasefire. Now Biden is saying it. Oh, we have to have a ceasefire. The United Nothing is saying it. If Hamas was winning, they wouldn't be calling for a ceasefire, that's for sure. But now let's look. Lie upon lie upon lie. There's a film clip. You're not going to see it on the mainstream media. Of Hamas going into a hospital operated and funded from Indonesia. It's Indonesian hospital funded by Indonesia in Gaza. They go in there and they take fuel from the hospital needed for the generators. They take fuel from the hospital and confiscate it for military purposes. By some estimates, there are 500,000 gallons of gasoline and diesel stored in those tunnels for military purposes, none of it being used to help the people. If they say, oh, we need fuel to make electricity and pump water, give us fuel so we can use it to fuel rockets. Then they say it's because of the occupation. Here's the next lie. Christians need to know how to refute these lies. What occupation? Israel has not been in control of Gaza since 2005. The government of Gaza was Hamas, not Israel. No occupation? None. Oh, it's an occupation of the West Bank, though. Hamas is not the government of the West Bank. The government of the West Bank is the Palestinian Authority, controlled by their rivals, Fatah, whom they had a civil war with, killing 8,000 people in Gaza. To say nothing of the fact that an indigenous people cannot occupy its own historical land, as verified by archaeology. Even if that was true, which it isn't, Hamas is not the government of the West Bank. It is doing this to try to gain control of the West Bank away from Fatah. There's no occupation. There was no Israeli troops in Gaza. None. And it proves land for peace doesn't work. If there was an Israeli occupation of Gaza, as there had been before 2005, this wouldn't be happening to either the Israelis or the so-called Palestinians. You can't make land for peace with people like that. How can you switch land for peace or make a two-state solution with Hamas that says, no, we only want a one-state solution from the Jordan to the Mediterranean with no Jews or Christians in it? How can you make peace with people like that? Two states, there already is a two-state solution. Jordan's a Palestinian state, according to King Hussein of Jordan and Yasser Arafat and the UN and the League of Nations. There always has been a Palestinian state, but they want a third one. But they don't want a third one because the third one would be the West Bank and the fourth one would be Gaza because they're rival governments. No, they only want a one-state solution. An Islamic state from the Jordan to the Mediterranean with no Jews or Christians in it. They say that. How can you make peace or talk about such nonsense as a two-state solution with people like that? Occupation. There was no occupation. There's no two-state solution with people who don't believe you have a right to exist in your own land. Verified by archaeology, even if you don't believe the Bible and history. Their only claim is Allah gave it to us. You have to accept our religion. That's the basis of their claim. Nothing that can be verified legally in international law. Ute procebius juris says the land belongs to the Jews in international law. The Bible says it belongs to the Jews, and history says the Jews are the indigenous people, and archaeology verifies it. They only have one claim: you have to submit to our religion. Dar el-Islam and Dar el-Harb. Allah wants us to have it, and you have to accept that. Otherwise, you're a homophobe. There's no occupation. There was none. It is a lie. A lie that the media is happy to tell, but it's a lie. That students are stupid enough to believe, but it's still a lie. Next lie you need to know how to refute is it's a blockade. Gaza bordered on two countries, Israel and Egypt. Why do the Egyptians want nothing to do with Hamas? Because it is the military branch of the Muslim Brotherhood who killed Anwar Sadat for making peace with Israel. The Egyptians don't want them either. Fatah wanted them eliminated, tried to destroy them. Other Palestinians. You have a border with another Arab Islamic country. How can there be a blockade? Why are you blaming Israel? Egypt is a Muslim Arab country. You have a border with them. With a crossing at Rafah. But then there's the border with Israel. The Israelis were a little more open, in fact, considerably more open than the Egyptians are. Every day, 17 to 18,000 Arab Gazans were allowed to cross the border to work in Israel to earn a living. And the Israelis were willing to increase it as long as they were peaceable. They let 17,000, 18,000 people go to work in Israel and earn a living every day. The Israelis opened their hospitals and gave free medical care, free surgery to people, to elderly, to children in Gaza, because the standard of medical care in Israel is much higher. It's the highest in the Middle East. The best hospitals and doctors are in Israel, 20% of whom, by the way, are Arab. That is another lie, the lie of apartheid. Well, there's no blockade. The Israelis allowed fuel, water, medical supplies to cross that border every day and let people go to work. There was no blockade. Never. A lie. But tell the lie often enough and people will believe it. The next lie. The Israelis bombed the hospital. The BBC, who are no friends of Israel, investigated. The hospital was never bombed. Moreover, there was no crater. When a fighter plane drops a bomb, it creates a crater. There was no crater. A misfired rocket fired by most likely Palestinian jihad landed in a parking lot next to the hospital and did collateral damage to the hospital. The Israelis did not target any hospital. And I saw one demonized liar talking to Piers Morgan, saying he wants a moment of silence for the children and for the cancer patients murdered by the Israelis in the hospital when the hospital was never bombed and the Israelis didn't do anything. Even though underneath hospitals is where they put the entrance portals to the tunnel system, where the terrorists operate from. Just a lie. What, you put cancer patients in a parking lot? You put cancer patients in a car park? It's unbelievable. But the media will show it. Well, we have to allow in humanitarian assistance. Okay, release the hostages and we'll let it in. No, just let it in. We're not releasing the hostages. You can't do this. You're hurting civilians. We need humanitarian aid. What about our civilians? We'll happily let the aid in. Just give us our hostages and you can have the aid. No. You're committing genocide, says the UN. What do you mean? They can have the aid? Just let us have our civilians who you've abducted. Oh, God. It's just evil. This is just evil. Well, it is for sure that most of the aid that has been let in so far has been confiscated by Hamas. It was not distributed by international organizations or IGOs to the people. The government of Gaza is Hamas, and they took most of it for military purposes. They want it for themselves, not for the people. Well, here, we'll give it to the people. Just give us our hostages. No. Just give us the aid so we can steal it from our own people. And Christians allow themselves to be conned by this? Some do. Let's look. What's happening here? It's called intersectionality. Communism failed with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Iron Curtain. Collapsed. China knew it didn't work. It's just a fascist government claiming to be communist, but they turned to capitalism. Now that's collapsing because of the communism. But it failed. So a new form of communism was developed called intersectionality, which was not new economically, but new strategically. You divide the world into the oppressor and the oppressed. And the Palestinians are the oppressed and the Israelis are the oppressor. No. The Palestinians are the oppressed and Hamas is the oppressor. The Israelis gave them an increase in standard of living of 370%, according to the UN World Health Organization. It only went down again under Hamas. When the Israelis were running Gaza, the people's standard of living increased fourfold. It's apartheid. I knew what apartheid was. I go to South Africa a lot. Blacks couldn't go to universities. I remember the American apartheid called segregation in the American South in my youth. Jim Crow. I remember the signs on restaurants, white only. I never saw a sign that said Jew only in Israel. I've seen apartheid. I've seen segregation. I've seen apartheid, but I never saw it in Israel. 22% of the university students in Israel are Arab. 20% of Israel's medical professionals are Arab. What apartheid? It's a lie. The Jews in Israel have a much higher standard of living than the Arab nations that surround it, and the Arabs in Israel have a much higher standard of living than most that surround it. Oh, because of the small population and oil wealth, you have rich Arabs in Saudi Arabia. But look at the poverty of the foreign labor in Dubai. Look at the people who come there from other Muslim countries like Pakistan, and they live in borderline subhuman poverty in these rich Arab Muslim oil states and emirates. You don't see that in Israel. At any given time, you've got 20,000 Arabs serving in the Israeli military voluntarily. They don't have to. They're not conscripted. It's voluntary. That includes Muslims, not just Arab Christians. It includes Muslims, Circassian Muslims. It includes Bedouin Muslims. They serve voluntarily in the Israeli military because Israel treats them better than Muslim countries. What apartheid? It is another lie. I know what apartheid was. We have a branch in South Africa. I can introduce you to people, black and white, in South Africa, who knew exactly what apartheid was. Israel is not apartheid, nor is it anything like it. It is a lie. Ceasefire? They just want to rearm. They're afraid of losing, so they can attack again. They said it. We're going to do it again. We'll never abandon our principles. There'll be more abductions and invasions. But in the meanwhile, we're a victim. We want a ceasefire so we can rearm and kill you and sew your baby's heads off. And if you don't let us do it, you're an Islamophobe. And the stupid students believe them. Same students who are pro same-sex marriage and transgender ignore what happens to people of that sexual orientation, what Hamas would do to them, and does do, and their Iranian sponsors. Unbelievable once again. You can't make this up. There's no occupation, there's no blockade. Humanitarian assistance is being confiscated. But we'll let it in anyway. Just give us our hostages back. No, just give us the assistance so we can steal it from our own people. Oh, the civilians. Which civilians? The ones you're using as human shields? You got the blood of Jews on your hands, and you got the blood of your own people on your hands, including your own children. And the stupid Western left and students buying into intersectionality. We need a ceasefire. Yeah. What did Montgomery tell Yoda? You can have it. Surrender. The Third Reich must be destroyed. You want a ceasefire? You can have it. Surrender. Hamas must be destroyed. These are their own words. The nations of the world will come against Israel before Christ comes, and when he comes, we're told in Zechariah 12. And that's what we see the stage being set for. As Christians, we know that. But you've heard their own words. We're going to do this again. Suicide bombing is all right. There's no difference between a Jew and a Zionist. We're going to murder you. There's no two-state solution. You already gave us Gaza. That was Allah giving us victory in the jihad. Now we're going to take the rest of Israel. Their own words. We're going to murder you. Osama bin Laden was a great martyr and a hero for Islam. The Americans murdered him. Man who responsible for the Twin Towers and the Pentagon being attacked. But then it goes on. We'll not have one Jew, Abdelaziz. We're going to turn our people into suicide bombers, Sheikh Ahmad Yassin. We'll never give up our principles or our arms, says Ismail Hania. And our principle is to kill you. It must be the land of the Waqf. All Israel must be Islamized. Allah's given to us, Israel, says Mahmoud Zahar. Will not leave one Jew. It goes on. Muslims of America, there's a call to jihad, a call to martyrdom, says Hamas. Strike the Jews wherever they are, not the Zionists, the Jews, says Hamas. The Jews are the most despicable of animals that need to be made to crawl on the earth. Allah Abu al-Sub. The Holocaust was an invented lie of the Zionists. Halil al-Hayat. Suicide is our right. The Jewish faith is based on blood and murder. No, yours is. These are their own words. Their own words. It's not about Palestine or Gaza or Israel. It's about taking over the whole planet. And it's not about killing the Jews. It's about killing the Christians too. Last week, says Hamas, Mahmoud al-Zahar, 20 hours ago, less than 24 hours ago, Kahazi Hamad, what we did on October 7th, we're going to do again. There's no blockade. There's no apartheid. There was no occupation. None of that. These are their own words. Their own words. Can you imagine somebody reading the speeches of Hitler or Goebbels, their own words, and say, we have to have a ceasefire. We have to make peace. Chamberlain tried to make peace with Hitler, and look what happened. Look at the Blitz. Stupid people tried to make peace with Hitler. Cowards tried to make peace with Hitler. And stupid people and cowards are trying to make peace with Hamas. How could anybody read the speeches of Himmler and of Hitler and Goebbels and say you can make peace with this person? How can anybody read the words of Hamas and say you can make peace with Hamas? We need a ceasefire so they can reorganize and attack us again. We need to let in humanitarian aid so they can steal it from their own people and continue to hold the hostages. This is insanity. It's totally insane. Now, again, I believe Israel is under God's judgment. It's under the curse of the law. It is under the things that God said would happen. It is under the consequences of rejecting its Messiah in Deuteronomy 18. You read what happened on Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. You read Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28. You can see the history of the Jews and why this is happening. But now we've gone exactly back to what you saw in the environment of the Holocaust of the 1930s. And we know what it's coming to. Fortunately, as a believer in Jesus, I know how it's going to end. They will look upon him who they have crucified and mourn as one mourns for an only son. I know how it will end for Israel. But Zechariah and Obadiah also tell me, And the book of Revelation also tells me how it is going to end for the enemies of Israel. Please, friends, don't be one of them. Thank you so much for listening. God bless.
Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart feel lonely and long for heaven? When Jesus is my portion, a constant friend is He. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. And why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart feel lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion and my constant friend is He. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I am happy, and I sing because I'm free. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing